we're running slightly behind, so I shall just dive straight in. This is handle Apex errors with reasonably innovative strategies. I like to think of it as, if you haven't got it in your org, it's innovative because it's new to your org. Otherwise, it's not. So if this is the session you were expecting, well done, you found the right place. If it's not the session you were expecting, stick around, you might learn something anyway. So that was the one sat-nav joke in there, coincidentally. Apologies for it being very yellow. It's our company branding, but we'll gloss over that. So you've heard me talking briefly officially and quite a lot unofficially as I was heckling Todd. So for those that you haven't met me, I am Rob Cowell. I am a DevOps advocate, which is a fantastic job title, over at Gearset. But before that, I was one of you. I was a developer, architect, general dog's body for about 13, 14 years on the platform. I wrote a book. I'm not going to plug it any more than that. You know my name. You know where Amazon is. Have fun. Cool. Alrighty. So, wow, that aged well, didn't it? No, I do strongly still encourage you to embrace the well-architected principles. Even if the official well-architected / architect evangelist team is no longer in that capacity, there's a lot of fantastic material in there, and I do encourage you to just take some of those principles on board. Hello, Mr. Keir.
I just want to ask a question about that, because I think that's a really good advice, but what's your view on how that is going to age? Do you think that's going to, given a couple of releases, the well-architected may be out of date, or is it your opinion that it will...
So I think that the well-architected principles are timeless to a degree. I mean, Agentforce, et cetera, may tweak them, but I think the fundamental foundation of the well-architected principles, and I encourage you to go and find it while the website's still up there. Please, somebody mirror that. I think the principles stand the test of time. I think the reference to it didn't age well is more around the recent news that the team behind it is sadly dismantled due to org reshuffles at Salesforce. But yeah, the point there, and the well-architected principle that I want to lean into today is around resilience. Okay, it's one of the pillars of the well-architected framework, and resilience is all about making sure the org is stable, solid, usable, and to a degree, or one of the factors of that is handling your errors suitably. And there's a great soundbite there. Error handling is not just about solving problems, it's about creating robust and resilient systems. Yeah. Full disclaimer, I was a dev, I now work in marketing, so soundbites are kind of my thing now. But I think it's fairly solid principle to stand behind or stand in front of. So let's have a quick look at what we're going to cover. Which screen is the most readable without looking at the slide? So we're going to cover a few topics in today's or tonight's session. I want to talk about the Apex exception hierarchy and just how Apex exceptions and error handling is handled on the platform itself. And then I want to kind of move on to custom exceptions, so how we can take that foundation and extend it a little further and build upon that to make it a little more useful to our specific use cases. Then we're going to talk about an error logging framework. This is a subject very dear to my heart. I'm a big fan of error logging frameworks, and there's one in particular that I use on a regular basis. Where's Ellie? Ellie has presented on this at London's Calling. I'm going to touch upon it. Spoiler alert, it's Nebula Logger. Then we're going to move on to dynamic error notifications, so a little bit about making sure that they're timely and that they're kind of context aware. Then we're going to talk about what we do about it. So how do we actually recover from those errors? How do we fail gracefully? And what are our governance and our principles around getting back to business as usual? And then finally, we'll talk about context aware. So the error messages that you present to the user are very different to those that you'll present to the developer, and I'll dive into a little bit of that. And there may be some surprise agenda items at the end. So let's get cracking. Apex exception hierarchy. So again, we're a room of developers and beyond here. I don't want to sort of teach everyone the fundamentals, but I think it is good to get a firm grounding in where we're starting from. So ultimately, an error in Salesforce is an exception. But from the object model perspective and from the sort of hierarchical view, we can break that down into a little more specificity, which is a very hard word to say this side of a few beers. But basically you say, like, okay, I've got an error. What kind of error is it? So we have DML exception, so our insert, update, delete, undelete, and I think that largely covers DML. Query exceptions, so when we're actually trying to pull the data out, actually things haven't worked as well. Limit exceptions, which are kind of a special case. So with a limit exception, you can't really catch those exceptions. You can't really proceed from those exceptions, but there are a few areas that we can look at, which we'll cover in a moment. They're a little more specialized. There are things like transaction finalizers and batch apex error handlers and complex mechanisms. But the principle really here that I don't want to sort of go too deep on this. The principle is there are many types of exceptions, so you can start categorizing them. And this is a technique that will become very important and very useful as we proceed. Because we're not just stuck with Salesforce's categorization. We can actually build our own. So many of us will work in our Salesforce orgs. We have things that are very specific to our business or our customer's business that actually make sense. And you want to be able to say, right, where is this error coming from? What happened? What type of error are we actually seeing here? And this is where custom exceptions can come in. So in our example with our very carefully crafted name of payment gateway exception, we can generally infer that this is going to be an exception in our payment gateway code functionality or automation. So again, very skeleton code here. I don't tend to flesh out my examples. I like to keep them fairly illustrative. But we can see here a couple of key things. Firstly, we've extended the standard Salesforce exception class. We're saying, actually, we're going to add a little functionality to this and make it a little bit more specific. Now, in this example, as the smart folks in the room will see, I haven't actually done that. I haven't actually made it that specific. But there's some key things to take away. Firstly, we've called it a payment gateway exception. So now, when we are looking at logs, when we are looking at error messages or anything that alerts us to the presence of this exception, we know that it's not just, we don't have to go and look at, oh, something's gone wrong, what is it? We know to actually focus our attention down onto the payment gateway area of functionality. So we know instantly, we've kind of filtered and refined our search surface area to, okay, something's gone wrong with the payment gateway. The other thing that we're doing, and I hate the phrase best practice, because what's best practice for me might not be best practice for you. There are many variables. Mr. Bowden, hello.
I was just curious, so you've got public without sharing there. Just wondering if there was a reason you got without sharing.
Because I was quickly throwing examples together. No other reason than that. Yeah, ignore that bit. That bit isn't best practice. And
to be honest, I think it's the right thing to do. Always make it without sharing in case someone comes along afterwards and adds in some SOPL queries that you weren't expecting.
The other thing to consider as well is if an error happens, do you really want the sharing of permissions to get in the way of you knowing about it? Okay, so yeah, there are schools of thought that could be a whole talk unto itself. However, not the point I was looking to illustrate. The other thing that I'm doing here is and I am going to sort of disappear off to slide land, I am calling the super method. Anyone familiar with super methods? Object-orientated 101, fantastic. We've got at least one, possibly two. So the super method is basically saying, call the parent version of this method, or find a reference in the parent class. So in this case, that would be exception. That will fire this message. So there's a few sort of things where you can actually say bubble this upwards to the parent class. Yes. Oh, you know it from JavaScript? Okay, yeah, I know it from Java. No script, just Java. But yeah, it's basically Keir Bowden again.
Help this time. And notice you've got error code and response body. So what is the reason that you need to add those into the standard exception? What's lacking on the standard exception?
There is nothing. So in this particular example, I'm just the illustration I'm making is that you can extend the class and add your own methods to it. You can override methods. You can basically process.
Everyone's laughing. That wasn't intended to be.
No, it's a fair point.
It is valid to add things in, to add this information in. That's what I thought you were doing.
Yeah. No. So yeah. It's all good. It's all good. No, so the idea is I say illustrative that you can do more than the base exception class does. I haven't illustrated all the possibilities. I haven't even illustrated one possibility particularly well. But the point is, it's illustrative that you can take this and run with it. Okay, so if you want to, for example, in your constructor, you say, okay, the first thing I want to do is capture this in this system, or I want to create a record that stores it in this object, or anything that you could possibly imagine that might want to happen when this error occurs, you can do that in there. You can also enrich that data. So I'm not enriching it very well, as Keir's pointed out. I'm just capturing the error code and response body from that payment gateway and setting it as a property. I haven't I wanted it to fit on the screen, basically.
But I'd argue that's really important, because otherwise that's lost.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You've had an exception, you don't know what the error code was, you don't know what the response body was, all you've got is maybe a message that's not helpful, so that's really valuable.
Thank you, Keir. Thank you. So hopefully we've got the idea of a custom exception. It's like take the exception that's occurred, refine it, give it it's that bloody word again, specificity, make it specific, that's easier to say. And then, when you get to the point of error logging, spoiler alert, you'll actually be able to see and categorize and group and filter and all these great things that you can do. So let's move on before Keir puts his hand up again. Oh, error logging framework. Did I just mention that? So let's have a look at error logging frameworks. I will tackle one, because I know it well. I've used it in the wild back when I was a dev. I like it. It's Nebula Logger. Others are available. Please do look at the market. Many people do roll their own, and there's nothing wrong with that if you have very specific needs. I'm going to put my stake in the ground and say if it already exists and it's 80 to 90% doing the job that you need, don't reinvent it, extend it. I mean, in this particular example, Nebula is open source. You're absolutely free to do that. However, moving on, Nebula Logger is fantastic. So Nebula will log your Apex exceptions. That's the point of tonight's talk. It'll also handle Lightning Web Component exceptions. It'll handle Flow exceptions. It'll handle Omni Studio, Omni Script. I haven't delved into that world. Apologies to all the Omni world. It'll handle those as well. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Please do go and have a look at that. But the point is that having created these exceptions, having extended the exceptions and built a structure within your org where you're actually categorizing, you're refining, you're delineating what type of exception it is, this is a great place to capture them. We have the obligatory screenshot there. I don't think it's telling us huge amounts of information other than there are some log entries, it captures them, and we can delve into the details. But there's a few kind of useful things that it does do for us. It'll group issues. So if you have X occurrences of the same issue, you don't want to be drilling down into every single thing. Yeah, that's the same thing. Yeah, that's the same. It'll do that for you, which is really useful. And the great thing about that from a development, prioritization, support perspective is it really allows you to focus on, okay, you can kind of do that sort of occurrence versus impact graph matrix thing. I say, actually, this is an easy win, but it solves a lot of problems for people. Or actually, that's a really hard problem, but it only happens like once a quarter. I'm probably going to park that till later. So you get to have that kind of triage thing. And it is very adaptable. As I say, it is open source. It's not complicated. I've extended it. Oh, God, I've spoiler alerted again. There are a few things that you can do with it. But the main important thing is it's better than not having a framework. Okay, who here has ever had to deal with those apex exception emails or particularly flow exception emails, right? They just come in and it's a horrible stack trace. It sits in your inbox. No one ever cares about it. No one does anything. This is better, right? This allows you to actually get some insight into what is causing my users, my customers, some pain points. Okay? We're all about solving those pain points. And I've used this and I've identified those issues that just got swallowed up and invisible and fixed things. So dynamic notifications. So when I say dynamic, what I actually mean here is how are we actually delivering those error notifications? Okay? How are we making people aware that those issues are occurring? So we talked a bit about the aggregation there. So we have a central point of seeing them. We touched upon the flow exception emails. And I'm not going to plug our brand new product on that area. It's not for me to do. But there is, I think we can generally agree as a consensus, there's a better way of handling emails, exceptions than receiving emails about them that no one ever looks at. Probably diverts to a folder so they're not in our primary inbox. So there's a few channels that we can do. I mean, email is one. Slack notifications potentially is another. We can call out to things like Splunk or other logging tools. There's observability, so things like Datadog. I saw a guy in the pub with a Datadog T-shirt, which reminded me of that. New Relic is their primary. There are a lot of mechanisms for actually bringing some structure and some capturing of this information. And effectively, what these are your smoke detectors, right? The idea is that you get to hear about these errors before your users do, okay? There's nothing worse than your boss turning up on the corner of your desk and saying, so we're getting these notifications and I need you to pick up on that. Well, what's going on? You don't want any of that. You want to be ahead of the game. If you can just under the carpet. No, don't put them under the carpet. Just, forewarned is forearmed, right? And the idea is that the earlier you can get a notification, the earlier you can deal with the problem, okay? Dealing with the problem is the crux of this argument. So we've talked about the multiple channels, but we also want to talk about the boundaries of these, right? There are many ways that we can categorize this. Is it a high priority or a low priority? We talked about that graph earlier. It's like, happens a lot, but it's actually low priority, or happens once a quarter, but it's actually really important. This affects our financial reporting, our shareholder value, whatever it is that may happen in your scenarios. So with that, when we categorize them, we also want to make sure that they're actionable. Actionable means, in the context of error notifications, means providing sufficient and context-relevant information. And I mentioned it briefly earlier as we were kind of warming up to today's session, but the error message that you present to an end user has one degree of value, and the error message that you present to your developers that are actually going to go and fix that error is a very different prospect. It's much more detailed. It allows them to focus in on where the error is, what the error is, hopefully, and it aids that path to resolution. And this is where we get to these kind of specificity, again, of those error messages. It's making those informed decisions like what do they need to know to solve the problem. Now, we talked about the custom Apex exceptions. That goes a long way to provide that information. Again, if we know it's a payment gateway exception, let the developer know that so that we can actually go and look at the payment gateway code, flow, component, whatever it may be, that's actually handling that. So, for critical issues, you might want an email alert. For less pressing matters, maybe just fire a platform event, throw it in another thing, capture it in a log. It'll get picked up at some point. And it's all about getting that right balance, right? Everything that we do is generally about balance. It's like, it's almost that architectural thinking. I know many developers straddle the sort of developer-architect divide, and some are kind of moving further away. And it's that architectural thinking. It's thinking about, what is actually the most value that I can derive from this without throwing too much resource at it. Okay, it's always that balancing act. So that's effectively what I mean by dynamic error notification. So we've got all these errors. and we've captured them, and we're logging them, or we're getting our alerts, or we're presenting the right information to the right people at the right time. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to fix? How critical is that error? Is it stopping the business from proceeding, or is it just a minor irritant? So at this point, continuing our journey of kind of architectural thinking, we want to think about actually what are we going to do when things do go wrong? Do we we'll deal with it later, keep calm and carry on? Or actually, do we need to actually jump on this and address it? How do we get back to that? If you think about some common patterns in batch processing, for example, do you want to stop the entire batch? Or do you want to just skip that record, capture the information that, okay, this particular record ID with this particular field, something wasn't right, carry on and keep processing? There's no right answer, right? It's going to depend on the scenario. Some things are far more important than others. And that's where your skill, your expertise, your experience will come into the fore and actually be able to add input to those scenarios, to be able to aid that decisioning process, because it's not always going to be your decision, right? You're the technical subject matter expert. There may be a business subject matter expert that says, actually, we don't care about that. Or it's like, oh, no, actually, that's really important to us as a business. We need to address that. And that's really kind of the tipping point, the decision point around, what is our logic for recovery? And recovery is a broad spectrum. Do we roll back, putting my DevOps hat firmly back on? And rollback can be code and config and deployments, but it can also be data, right? It could be that someone's actually made a data change that's broken things. There are many reasons that errors happen, as we all know. So we need to kind of make a playbook for what are we going to do about it when this happens. And I hate to use the D word here, but documentation is critical. If you have a procedure for what you're going to do about it, write it down, follow it, make sure that people are aware of where that is. It's like, if this happens, do this. The details are here. Okay? It can be as simple as that. And then I've got proactive planning and scenario management, which is a whole lot of buzzwords for practice, practice, practice. Words that I know are very dear to Keir's heart when he talks about public speaking. But it's true, do disaster recovery drills. Simulate it in a sandbox. Like, if I break this, can the system get back on its feet with or without my help? And it's okay to do it with intervention. Not everything has to be automated for these recoveries. Sometimes it can't be. But have a plan. Always have a plan. What is your retry logic? How do you handle partial success? These are all factors that you throw into the mix and build out okay, these are the variables, this is the output. Think of it almost as a, dare I say, a flow. I know we're all Apex and component heads here, but think of it in that logical sense. Given this happening, go down this path, where do I want to get to? How do I get there? So, context aware. This is where I get to use one of my favorite words. So in Salesforce, in Apex, there is a fantastic little device or framework, structure, keyword, call it what you will, called quididity. And that's almost as hard to say as specificity. But quididity is basically, how did I get here? Okay, was I called from a flow as an invocable method, for example? Was I called from a batch job? Was I called from an external API? Quididity will give you some of that information. I can't enumerate all of them from memory, but those are some examples. Flows, Apex, batch, callouts. There are lightning components, they're bulk. The possibilities are endless. But what this does allow you to do is to make informed decisions around, how did I get here? So what am I going to do about it? How did I get here in terms of where do I need to go and debug and trace and go and look at and simulate and replay and all those other techniques that we use for fixing these Apex errors. Little example there, just in terms of how you actually get that information. Again, more comments than code there. Comments are great, though. We love comments, right? Who doesn't love a good comment in their code? Except when there's a deadline. But yeah, that's basically the structure. You get the current request. From that request, you get the request ID. From the request, you also get the quididity from that same request info object there. I'm not going to expand on it much further than that, other than documentation exists. But the principle is knowing how you got to that error, where did it come from, what was the path that was taken in your org that tracked through to cause this error, goes a long, long way into debugging it. Now, I said there was going to be a unannounced agenda item. So I've been having a bit of a play with all of this stuff. And as a bonus feature, I started diving into Nebula Logger a little further. So what I did was I built a Lightning Web Component, because who doesn't love a Lightning Web Component? Now, I'm going to scurry off to the other side of the screen. Hopefully this doesn't break the recording too much, but I can see it better. The Lightning Web Component does a few things with Nebula Logger. So in Nebula Logger, you have the details of the exception. So we can see the exception message. We have the stack trace, which varies in its usefulness generally. But what I've done, I've got a little component. I've captured that log, and I've behind the scenes, not visibly, but I've also captured the stack trace, and I've thrown it at OpenAI / ChatGPT. Hello, yes, I'm over here now, sorry.
Why not Agentforce, Rob?
Okay, great question, okay, and I will take it at face value. The reason I didn't have it in Agentforce, I had a developer org. You can't get Agentforce in a developer org. I've since moved on to simple demo orgs, the secret weapon of partners everywhere, which does have it enabled. But in deference to
Is that what the yes means?
simple,
Yeah,
SDOs.
Never interrogated that.
There we go.
Learn something new every day.
So yes, when I started playing with this, Agentforce, if you weren't a customer that had paid for it, was actually quite hard to get your hands on outside of a Coral Cloud Trailhead org, which only lasts for 14 days. So I took an executive decision, and I said, well, actually, I have ChatGPT, I have a paid account, I have access to the API. I'm just going to throw it at that. The principles that you will see here are equally applicable to Agentforce with a little different construction. And it's on my to-do list to rebuild this as an Agentforce thing. However, underlying principles. Take the log, put a little button on it saying analyze it. All the analyze button does is say, call out to OpenAPI, ChatGPT as it's popularly known, and I prefix with, given the following error message and stack trace, please tell me what the problem is and how I might start fixing it. Simple as that. Little spinner appears, and it does exactly that. So this is Nebula Logger. This is a screen from Nebula Logger. It's one of their standard Lightning pages, and I've just thrown a Lightning component into it. Apex class, very small. I forgot to preload VS Code with that code so that you can actually see it. But it's like my earlier examples. It's more comments than code. It's reasonably simple. You have an API key. You authenticate against it using this key token thing. You say, OK, this is the prompt. Give me the output. Get the output. Throw it back in the text box. Simple as. Just to prove I'm not making it up, how am I doing for time? So it's somewhere loaded up in another tab that's complicated to get to. I have this record. Without the output, I click on the button, you get a little spinner. It does exactly what I just described. So the point is that when I talk about innovative strategy, this is the one bit that might possibly qualify as innovative in all of this. Is that with the advent of AI agents, call them what you will, you can actually get this output, and you can say, like, go and figure this out for me. So your path to resolution potentially becomes a lot quicker. Right, this is low-hanging fruit, right? This is a required field missing.
Need AI to tell you what's wrong there, then you
Yeah, thanks, Louise. All examples are illustrative. But it was a quick and easy way. Like, there's nothing harder in Apex, believe me, than deliberately throwing an exception. When you want it to break, it's actually surprisingly hard. So yeah, I just deliberately missed a thing. I put in a trigger that didn't do what it needed to do, just to generate an entry.
still say, what's the problem?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, right. I mean, hands up if you've ever had an end user that's filled out every required field ever, right? Yeah, liar. Right. So, again, all examples illustrative, but it shows that, you can get the error message, you can get the stack trace, right? And I deliberately combined them to give the agent as much information as it needed to work from, and it gives a pretty good answer. It's bang on the money. I mean, okay, this is low-hanging fruit, but it's possibilities, right? We're all about delivering possibilities to our customers, our users, our paying clients, call them what you will. So let's wrap this up and give Ankit a fair chance to deliver his talk. So, a few takeaways that I want you to take away. Be specific, okay? Filter those error messages down. Create those custom exceptions. Make sure that when you're raising an error, give the right information to the right people at the right time. A phrase that I used earlier, but I think it is worth repeating. Don't ignore exceptions. The amount of times that I've seen people in Apex classes write catch exception, and then it's like system.debug exception message. It's like no one ever reads those debug logs, and they don't even get written to the debug logs unless you've got debug logging turned on, which only lasts for 30 minutes anyway, I think. Is it 30 minutes? Sorry? Well, you can do, but the default, I think, is 30 minutes of logging. And yeah, no one ever checks them. No one ever does that. And like, you don't know to switch the debug logging on until there's a problem, but you don't know. Yeah, chicken and egg. So yeah, don't ignore exceptions. Do something with them. If you're going to catch it, handle it. Consider the user experience. So there are two audiences for error messages. The person in Salesforce just trying to close that epic deal or secure that great contract like our friends at Mason Frank are doing. They want to update the record. There's an error message. Okay, the error message needs to be meaningful. What did I do wrong, or what did the system do wrong? Okay, one or the other. It's going to be one of the two. But make it so it's meaningful to a non-technical user. At the same time, get that technical information and go and give it to the developers or the architects or whoever's going to be handling that they have the information to go fix it. System stability is paramount. Wow, I was really in marketing mode when I wrote this slide. But it's true. Systems should be stable. They should be resilient. Coming back to what we were saying about well-architected framework, resilient is one of the core pillars of the well-architected framework. Your system should be as much as possible, and I know it's not 100% possible, but it should be able to handle everything you throw at it. And if it can't, then we want to make sure that we can get back to, not work around it, but continue business as usual from that point. We capture it, we let somebody know, they can deal with it, keep calm, carry on. Leverage logging wisely. I wish I had something beginning with L at the end there. Legitimately, I don't know. I just like the alliteration. But use the logging. Okay, it's your secret weapon. All right, it tells you what's going on. It's not quite full-on observability, which is a topic for a whole other day, which is a little more real-time. It's a little after the fact, but it does tell you generally the health and what's going on in your org so that you can go and deal with the problems. Design with recovery in mind. That's kind of a little parallel to what I was saying about system stability, but always think of how can I keep the business going? How can I make sure my org isn't on its knees and that people can continue to do their job. And then AI can start guiding you. We had a brief dipping of the toes into the water of AI agents and beyond. But yeah, use the tools that are available to you. I mean, it's as simple as that. AI is the tool du jour at the moment. But it is kind of useful, as we've seen from a canned screenshot. But, here's my error. Here's what's going on. I don't quite understand this. This is an error that I've not encountered before. Get a helping hand, okay? Just someone's seen it somewhere, And in the old days, we'd go look on Stack Exchange, or we'd go and look on the Trailblazer community, or social media, or whatever the channels we had to get a helping hand. Has anyone ever seen this error message before? We can kind of do that first tier triage of that using the agents and the AI tools that we have available to us now. And that's it. I've talked a great load. There you go. I have no concept of time tracking at all, so I don't know if there's any questions, but I'm kicking around, and if you have questions or want copies of the slides or the Git repo for the Lightning Web component that plugs into Nebula, etc., etc. Except Keir. No, come on. Go on. No. Well,
No questions. No questions.
That's a good sign.
There we go.
Oh, hello.
It's Slalom. Nice to meet you all. I've been here for a very long time, so it's great to see everybody. Just with the Nebula logging framework, I know that there's like a chance to do like a synchronous versus asynchronous method of logging on it. I was just wondering what your views are on like when to use one versus the other, if you would always prefer one over the other.
I do have a slight bias to the asynchronous, but it's like so many architectural decisions that we're going to take in Salesforce orgs, it's going to depend on your org. So if your org is currently like hitting limits and you are struggling for breathing room in terms of transactions and things that are going on in your org, go asynchronous. Eventual consistency, I think they used to call it. It's like it'll tell you when it gets a minute. Okay. However, if you have one of those super complex orgs that is pushing the boundaries of platform events and batch transactions and all those other asynchronous mechanisms, you might lean the other way. But I think, the key to it is just assess your org and think like, is logging the error going to actually create more errors? Am I going to hit limits? Is it going to get in the way of everything? But I would generally lean on the side of most people aren't hitting their platform event limits in day-to-day transactions, and that's the mechanism it's using to generate those. So, that is your breathing room. That's where I would lean. I'm nervously looking across to Keir in case he disagrees, but... Oh, well, is that what it was? It's gone all Guy Fieri on me.
It all depends on the situation.
Yeah, standard consulting answer. It depends. Yeah. 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 I saw another hand over that way. Yeah, hi.
Just wanted to understand, because the platform events, if you subscribe via flow or trigger, it's like unlimited free. So in theory, there should not be any limit in logging more errors.
Yeah. And the platform events thing is exactly what we were saying about there. It's like, have a look at your org. See, how much platform event capacity do you have to do that? There are other ways of capturing this. You could write it out to a table. Inside your org, you could do that synchronously, and then you would save a bit of that buffer. But then equally, you've got to think about the kind of can I do this within the same transaction? Apex was never easy, right? There's always these. There's like I could do. Oh no, I can't do it that way because of this. You have to kind of look at it in that way. The nice thing about it is that out of the box, I'm going to talk about Nebula because that's the one I know. Other frameworks will probably be the same. You have that flexibility to decide how you want to generate those notifications. If you really want to go custom, it is open source, and you can just pull it in and say, actually, I'm going to just like layer my own code or functionality over the top of that for my specific use case. But always look at what's best for my org, not this is a blanket solution that will work everywhere. Alrighty. Thank you, people.